In 1981, After Man by Dougal Dixon was published, a work of speculative evolution looking at life on Earth 50 million years after the extinction of humanity. A collection of creatures both strangely familiar and just strange. The rabucks and wolf-sized predator rats are hard to forget. It spawned a second book later in the decade, giving the same treatment to the dinosaurs as though their extinction had never occurred. And then he wrote Man After Man, which we can think of as a sprawling science fiction epic spanning millions of years, told in thin slices of the daily lives of beings that are both human and not. It begins roughly 200 years from our own time, on an Earth suffering from catastrophic ecological collapse. And mankind has bifurcated toward two futures. One out among the stars. A starship has been under construction for decades, and it will carry a select few out into the cosmos to start over. The rest will try to get by on a seemingly dying Earth, at least an Earth that can no longer support our technological civilization or our vast numbers. The first in the large cast of characters we meet, however briefly, is Pickerblick, an aquamorph. Homo aquaticus, engineered to live beneath the sea, where they farm the seabed now that the surface is largely infertile, and work the giant undersea deuterium mills to fuel the starships. Up in orbit, vacuumorphs, Homo celestis, build the mighty craft. Both species are the product of extensive bioengineering. Genetic manipulation, artificial organs grafted on, far from the base model HSAP, but still of the same source code. Of course, this didn't come easy, the decision to turn human embryos into these new creatures made for specific tasks. But racing against extinction opens the mind to otherwise unthinkable possibilities. Nevertheless, a time came when ethical considerations had to be compromised. If humanity were to survive, then it had to change. And so these strange homunculi labor away while the HSAPs go about their tasks. Some, like Himez Smoot, riding on hope and fusion out into the black. Others, fighting over scraps of food in the ruins of a dead civilization. The vacuumorphs, their tasks complete, and as crude first-gen bioengineered people, sterile, die out. But the engineers aren't done. While small groups of humans live in little primitivist communities, technological man persists underground. Weak little creatures kept alive by their machines. What had human beings come to now? Wizened bodies encased in machines, kept alive by mechanical contrivance and synthetically grown organs. Once, a long, long time ago, humanity developed through the process of evolution. With the coming of intelligence and civilization, this natural process was swept away. Medical science developed, and those that would have died off were now able to survive and reproduce. As a result, for man, the directive force of evolution, the process of natural selection, was eliminated. In consequence, the species deteriorated. Unhealthy changes that would have been wiped out now survived and were spread. The genetic stock became weaker as populations became bigger. This did not matter because medical science was always there to sustain life. No matter how degenerate a human body became, there were always the technological systems to keep it alive. It's an interesting passage in part because that kind of thinking carries with it a heavy shadow of the eugenics movements of the early 20th century, despite this basic premise not really being wrong. Technological humanity does short out evolution, perhaps even selecting 4 traits that were, biologically speaking, undesirable. And in many ways, this is a horrifyingly dystopian eugenics story, relying on advanced bioengineering rather than simple selective breeding. But the whole thing is about shaping humanity for specific goals decided on by people other than those who are most affected by the choices. But there is some small hope for the Earth-shattered ecosystem. While the large animals are extinct, the land itself, the jungles and forests, are recovering. The little animals remaining are flourishing in the absence of man and his industry. And one of these withered, dying humans sees a path to mankind's survival. Of a sort. Today, these habitats are open and silent, with only the smallest rodents and birds living there, along with insects and other invertebrates. Surely out here should be the future of mankind. If so, a renewed campaign of genetic engineering could be the means of reaching it. and so man is modified to live in these environments, naturally in them, not behind a wall of technology. The first are the aquatics, an improvement on the aquamorph, and most importantly, fertile and able to pass on all the modifications to their offspring. The aquatics are a real species, not just a constructed, barren thing. The sickly remnants of technological man create new species to live in the forests, various iterations of Homo fabricatus, designed for specific habitats but not over-specialized, such as the grassland dwellers. Raised in captivity, monitored and nurtured, and then when mature, released into their intended habitat out in the world to run free. Graham, the first of the grassland dwellers, is sent out to see if he survives, with little trackers on his body to relay information back to his makers. Family, as they are called. After some initial trepidation, he takes to his new surroundings rather well. With sudden joy, Graham bounds away toward a clump of low bushes. He could be happy here, no matter what family think. Suddenly, he does not care what family think. This is not their world. It is his. Then in a first and final gesture of defiance, he rips off the instruments that are strapped to his body and flings them away into the dusty grass. But not all of the remnant of technological man, the high-techs as they become known, are in agreement that turning ourselves into wild beasts with suppressed intelligence and a gut biome tailored to digest grass is the answer to human survival. This is not the way. Taking Andless and changing them into wild animals is not the way. Mankind's fate does not lie with these low creatures, but with those who have sustained the technological advances over the centuries. If mankind's future is not one of technological progress, then what is it? They believe the future is in better technology. Their frail bodies are kept alive by a massive array of machinery, carried around by mobile cradles. But if they can replace the machine with flesh, with a cultured cradle grown rather than built, a sort of symbiont, that could potentially save them. The first cultured cradle will have to be huge, as there is no way of generating synthetic organs that are as compact and neat as the real thing. In nature, most organs have more than one function. You can use your mouth for eating, breathing, and talking, and your fingers for feeling or handling. The synthetic organs that have been developed can only perform one operation at a time. And caught in the middle are the unaltered descendants of the old world. Tough people that come to be known as Andless. Of course, these small communities, farming, living in balance with their surroundings, are dismissed by the high-techs. And the feeling is mutual. To think that the high-tech believe them to be inferior just because they have not become so inbred and decadent that they need mechanical devices to keep them alive. You cannot live in a natural world by turning your back on nature, regarding it as an inconvenience to be overcome, a hazard to be avoided, an irritation to be shielded against. If that is what they wanted, they should have all gone to the stars on the colony ships of centuries ago. The time will come when they will see that the future does not belong to them with their artificial systems, but to those who can live in balance with nature. Aside from the real in-their-face problems of multi-front collapse, they're confronted with questions about what it means to be human. What makes a human being? That is the solid residue to which the argument condenses. Are we more human than the Andless because we make greater use of technology and they just live in the wild and grow their own food? Are the Andless more human because they are healthier and look more like our ancestors? If the latter is the case, then we could argue that the more primitive the being is, then the more human it is. And they are all of them, these thinking and pondering creatures, doomed. In a few hundred years, they're gone. Only their fabricated semi-human wild men remain. The tweaked shall inherit the earth. And over the next few million years, some interesting things happen. The engineered species spread, they adapt, they diverge into new varieties. Sometimes they encounter each other, mutual curiosity as competitors and increasingly as predator and prey. There is no humanity anymore, either as a single species or a reasoning sapient mind. Only animals with an eerily familiar common ancestry. And sometimes a glimmering of something. Not quite understanding, but awareness. Yarrick, for example, leader of his tribe and discoverer of underground tunnels that have fascinated him for most of his life. Beneath the gravel, the sand, and the clay lies the mystery. It was built by people a long time ago, and it was built to live in. Yarok can tell that by the pictures that he has found in it. Then it was destroyed by the sea, which he can tell by the layers of sand and mud that fill the rooms, chambers, and passages, and the old seashells that cluster on the crumbling walls and the red powdery metalwork. Other people lived there afterwards, once the sea had retreated again, probably digging into it like his own tribe does. He can tell this by the skeletons piled in the mud layers above that have to be shifted every time they dig downwards with the tool. The tool, a crude shovel, has been a boon to his tribe. Along with the clay model he's made of the chambers below, adding to it as new tunnels and rooms are found, he knows where to dig to find items to trade with other tribes. But his interest is less material. He wonders about the skeletons found inside. Who were they? The skeletons are of people, but of people quite unlike those of his tribe. His own people have longer arms and longer fingers and toes, as though they were designed to climb on things, rocks or even trees. Their teeth are bigger, as though they were meant to chew harder foods. Yarok feels a great sympathy with these old people, guessing that when he is dead, and that occurrence is not too far away, his skeleton will be found to be more like that of one of these ancient people than that of one of his own tribe. He has known that for years, but of course nobody else noticed. He was born different, as if he were actually the son of a very distant ancestor, but one who had lain dormant generation after generation and only reappeared with Yarok's birth. His resulting greater intellect soon made him the leader of the tribe, and he led them into peaceful and plentiful times. It is his one great sadness that his children do not take after him. They are all the same long-armed, long-fingered, dull-witted, instinctively acting creatures as their mothers. There are also groups with a hereditary memory that allows them to navigate. They have hazy recollections of where the rivers run, where the game animals congregate, what lies beyond the distant hills, and in some cases, things that came before. These memory people have a distinct survival advantage. For a while. The memories don't change. The world does. Scattered across the world, individuals and small groups start to become something more. Sporadic tool use for gathering food as weapons, but it doesn't quite click on a group level. An incident in the tundra between two creatures begins a symbiotic relationship that binds both species into something new. These animals keep brushing against some echo buried deep inside them. And always the aquatics are there, lurking deep beneath the waves. Curious fishmen. As the millennia tick by, that curiosity makes them venture onto land in big gelatinous bubbles, roughly equivalent to one of us scuba diving. We're not very agile and festooned with gear, but we get to be in an otherwise inaccessible environment and look around, maybe gather up a few things. The aquatics retain some of that because it's their exploratory drive. They also have a more basic drive. Their population has been steadily growing. They're straining their food supply, and they look to the islands as possible new food sources, as do some of the island-dwelling populations. A handful of islanders, there are a lot of island populations after an ice age and a warming period, build boats, first of wood and later with some crude metal components. This use of old knowledge makes them outcasts. Even the most rudimentary technology scares the majority of them, triggering vague dread of where it led before. The different species have many violent interactions. There's no recognition of kinship, no pan-human family. The Earth is still not fully recovered, and the populations have grown. Population growth and resource shortage is a constant theme. The aquatics begin to plant vast algae mats on the land, turning them into swamps that are just despised by the land dwellers. The grassland dwellers, engineered and set loose, have changed too. As the grasslands receded to deserts, they adapted to other food sources, and they became highly social, stratified into different types. Warriors and workers, a single breeding queen to keep the population growth in check. In time, they evolve into a true hominid hive society. It is mostly in their behavior that they differ from their ancestors. Now they have no individuality at all, listening for the few grunts of command from their leader and obeying blindly. It is not in the interest of the hive as a whole for anyone to show an individuality, and so it was lost generations upon generations ago. Naturally, there are offshoots from this main population. The hives are stationary, but there are nomadic cousins as well. Travelers, motivated by a very different perspective on the world, born of that race memory, a knowledge of things that came before, on which they build a code of conduct meant to avoid the fate that befell their makers. And this traps them, leaving them at the mercy of the natural world, and also puts them at odds with their cousins who lack that particular gift or curse. This is why the travelers despise the dark-minded creatures, their distant relatives, with whom they share the planet but who do not have the remembered knowledge. These beings, such as the planters, constantly use their minds and their hands to devise and construct artifacts. They are intelligent enough to think out anew the ways of doing things, although they do not remember that these things have been done before. It is as if the whole disease were starting all over again. And yet they are not so rigid in their convictions to completely deny themselves the benefits. A single layer of separation between them and the act is enough. Although the travelers make it their work to frustrate any of this activity wherever they find it, they also use its results. In the far north, where they go when times are warm, they eat the food grown in the enclosures by the planters. In the far south, when they have traveled there along the spines and ridges of high ground between the foul low-lying slimelands, they eat the roots and tubers stored in the cooled chambers of the hivers. It is a paradox that they do not even try to solve. They are, after all, human beings. Many distinct species evolve from that initial stock of grassland dwellers, forest dwellers and such. Some thrive and change, some go extinct, but none ever begin to approach the heights of their progenitors in the distant past. And as it turns out, it makes little difference. Life continued until 5 million years from our time, moving stars appeared in the sky. Only the possessors of the hereditary memory could have understood, but they have been extinct for millennia. Their religious refusal to use the knowledge that they all possessed meant that they could do nothing to help themselves to improve their situation. When natural conditions changed, they refused to change as well. The Earth's magnetic field reversed, continents moved, and changing sea levels cut off migration routes. Rivers changed their courses, volcanoes threw up new barriers, and climates altered from year to year. Creatures of lesser wit and no knowledge of the past survived these upheavals, which constituted disasters on a local scale, but merely inconveniences on a global one. However, amongst those with the memory, the changing conditions took their local environment further and further away from what they knew or remembered, and eventually, rather than change with it, they perished. Which is a really good framing of the whole "the map is not the territory" idea. They have a model in their head, in this case an actual memory map of the land, but it applies to any theoretical concept or ideology. A simplified model of something much more complex. And it's great. It helps you put things in context and understand complex things in quick, simple ways. If the model is sufficiently similar to reality, just much lower resolution. And at first it is, but for the memory people, it doesn't last. The landscape changes, the poles shift, making the map in their head completely backwards on those few details where it's still relevant. And like the travelers mentioned earlier, they reject any kind of technological progress, like boats and agriculture. Because their predecessors were technological, the world nearly died, therefore technology kills the world. Primitives they remain. This book is heavily influenced by that kind of Paul Ehrlich population bomb thinking. Every species in this, from the HSAPs at the start through the aquatics, the socials and hivers, all struggle with this problem of explosive population growth leading to famine. Modern man stripped the earth through technology-enabled population growth, and primitive, virtually animal man does the same, apparently just by being there. There's a sort of man as a cancer element to this whole thing, which comes back when the new stars in the sky begin to land. The beings change the atmosphere. They genetically modify the local creatures into everything from beasts of burden to a food source. And they rip the resources from the ground, leaving it a barren, polluted waste. As you've probably already surmised, these beings from the stars are the distant descendants of Himez Smoot and those like him who set out 5 million years before. Time, environment, and countless iterations of bioengineering have made them utterly alien. The only thing still human about them is that they ruin the earth. This book, like Dixon's previous volumes, is a fascinating thought experiment. But this one in particular is rooted in a deep time doomer malaise. Nothing man does matters and we ruin the world anyway kind of pessimism that has been the shadow of the environmental movement for decades. That underlying sense that the world would be better off without us. But it does end with one little glimmer of hope and lingering fealty to Team Human. The star travelers eventually leave, and of course the surface of the Earth is a trash heap in their wake. But deep down in the oceans, deeper than sunlight, deeper than the reach of the rapacious industry of an interstellar civilization, life goes on as it always has around the thermal vents at the ocean floor. Shrimp and tube worms and blind fish. There is also another creature only come to the smoky oases in the last few million years and unnoticed by anything on the surface. This creature has a fish-like body that allows it to swim and prehensile hands that help it to feel its way about and find its food. Its total blindness is no disadvantage in the solid blackness, but it has a sensitive organ on the top of the head, developed from an organ that its remote ancestors had forgotten, that is sensitive to heat and can give a temperature-based picture of the surroundings. More importantly, this creature has a brain that is complex enough to give it an intellect. This intellect tells it that something strange has taken place far above it. Maybe someday it will be possible for its descendants to travel upwards, and even possible for them to live in conditions that are totally alien to it. If they can change enough. Maybe someday. Well, I kind of bristle at the worldview underneath it. I've always found this book interesting for its time scale. How not only the physical remnants of our civilization disappear over time, but the complete mutability of primitive cultures that don't have refined metals and stone structures. They can so quickly just become bones and dirt with nothing left to tell their story. But just because our lives are insignificant on geological timescales doesn't mean they're insignificant objectively. They certainly aren't on human timescales. This book is kind of premised on a black pill worldview to which I can only say, in the long run, everything is fucked, but there's a whole lot of time between then and now. We've got a lot to do before we're all dust. Anyone else read the graphic novel Dinosaurs vs. Aliens? I mention it because it depicts dinosaurs having a culture when the aliens come, but their artifacts are all bone, wood, and body paint. Nothing that we would find and identify. But that's a topic for some time when I'm feeling a little more silly, which in this heat might not actually take that long.